Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. My next guest says many supply chain executives know where to look for opportunities to get better, but few are looking in one of the most obvious and invisible places. I'll unpack that and a whole lot more, but first, let's welcome to the hot seat Bart De Muynck, industry expert and head thinker at Better Supply Chains. Bart, welcome to the hot seat.
Spencer, thank you so much. Looking forward to getting some heat today in our conversation.
Well, based on what I've heard, I think you can handle it, but we shall see soon enough, sir. Before we do heat things up, why don't you just take 30 seconds and tell us a little bit about your background in the supply chain and what you're working on currently?
Yeah, we'll do that, Spencer. I've been in supply chain for almost 35 years now. Started my career in Europe, originally from Belgium, in case people wonder where that funny accent is coming from. Started working there for companies like GE, Penske Logistics, EY, then moved for a tech startup to England, and then came over to the US about 23 years ago. Here I've worked 10 years for PepsiCo on the food and beverage side. I've worked for a company called Gartner on the research side, was there for 8 years, then went back to the tech side with Project 44, and now for the last 2.5 years, working as an industry expert and independent advisor.
Which means you kind of get to do whatever you want, whenever you want. That's kind of what I take away from that. Very exciting. Well, let's jump right in right there. There's so much for us to cover here, but in general, 35 years in supply chain, so much has changed, even the last couple of years. But what hasn't changed that you've noticed over that period of time?
It's a good comment, right? And I refer to it a little bit like we're faced with two different economic realities, two different economic speeds. On the one hand, we're seeing that the world has changed considerably in the last, at least when I've been working, last 35 years. When I started in supply chain, by the way, supply chain wasn't really a word. You couldn't study it. I kind of fell into it, like I think a lot of us. But supply chains were a lot less complex. They definitely were a lot less global. And we didn't have the same kind of international disruptions that created a lot of havoc as they do today. At the same time, back then, we didn't have a lot of technology. Now, technology is moving at lightning speed. On the other hand, what hasn't changed that much is us, the humans. We haven't evolved that much. We are still just as resistant to change as we were early 90s when people were afraid because the computers were coming and everyone thought computers are going to take our jobs, a little bit like what people are thinking now about AI. And really, when I looked at it over this last Christmas break and was preparing for a keynote, I said, you know what? The reality is in 35 years, a lot of things have changed, but we often are still facing the same operational inefficiencies, the same pain points that we've had back in the 90s. So have we really made that much progress in supply chain? And I would say no. Now, the good side is there's a lot of opportunity. The downside is we are a little bit with our back against the wall. And when today's volatile environment, we just need to change and we need to start changing now.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. What about now is creating such urgency and has kind of raised the stakes about inaction?
Yeah, and you use the word now because I used it as well. And I actually came out this year with a new philosophy for supply chain. I call it the now philosophy. I do that for a couple of things. One, because the last few years I've heard too often not now. And so the opposite of not now is now, to create that urgency. But it's an acronym. The N stands for networked intelligence. The O stands for orchestrated agility. W is wide angle, transparency, visibility, whatever you want to use that term. But the fact is, Spencer, that your traditional linear supply chains are dead. They're not made for today's very fast-changing and volatile environment with lots of socioeconomic and geopolitical conflicts. So we need to have these systems that provide a lot more agility. What do we do with all the risk that's in the world, Spencer? Well, for this year, what do we see companies doing? They are diversifying their supplier base because they want to take risk away from a single supplier, from a single source, a single country, or even single region. On the other hand, they're continuously increasing inventories. Why it's a knee-jerk reaction is there's risk, so let's just increase our buffer stock. Now, all of that, although it reduces risk, it increases complexity, and it specifically increases the supply chain costs. And so one of the things I'm starting to see, it's a little bit the same as we had in the beginning of COVID, when we were trying to be resilient, but we did that at any cost. So with supply chain costs going up, demand still being fairly soft, I would say, and hopefully the economy will come back, companies really need to focus on their cash flow and they get to work on their profitability. And so to be able to go forward and to have a chance that in 5 years you're still around and still competitive and relevant, you need to start changing so you get that competitiveness, you get that profitability back, and we'll talk about that a lot more. You focus on people, because without people, there is no supply chain.
I mean, when you boil it down there, it sounds so simple, but as the saying goes, simple is not necessarily easy. So where are people getting the people issue wrong right now? I mean, there's these immense problems. People complicate everything as part of business, in good ways and bad. So where are you seeing other folks that are solving this problem well? What about their people strategy is allowing them to be successful?
Yeah, it's the whole automation paradox. We want to change, we want to transform, whatever you want to call it. We want to automate, but yet people are resisting to change. We sometimes don't have the right skill set, or what's been the major issue, Spencer, is that we have not been training and empowering and upskilling our people. And so we saw that, for example, during COVID with the big resignation, people just leaving because they were fed up. They didn't feel valued at their companies. And so those companies that aren't doing that, they're at risk to not being able to retain the people they have, and the institutional knowledge that those people have will leave the company. And secondly, they will not be attractive to younger folks coming out of university to come and work for them. So with that, like I mentioned, we need to have this new thinking about the supply chain, which I call the now philosophy. We also need to have a new approach to technology, but with that goes a new mandate around people. And so you have to focus a lot more about people, because if you just focus on saying we're going to transform and focus on technology, you're going to fail. And that's something we've seen the last 5 years, that digital transformation failed because there was an over focus on the technology. There was not enough focus on the vision, the people, the training, and the change management. And so people and how you approach the people will be really important in a world where our workforce is aging. And so our workforce population is shrinking, to still have the right talent to have the best supply chains.
So what do you think, as the labor force evolves as part of the supply chain, what do you see as the key people skill sets that will be most important for value creation into the future?
Yeah, we have to invest in brain capital, because the workforce in the future will look quite different than it is today, right? We're seeing obviously technologies come in. We see things like AI coming in. And so the skill set that people will need are different. It's no longer like, oh, can you do SAP? Can you work in this tool? Can you create macros in Excel? That'll be automated, but it'll be more things around collaboration, critical thinking, and other skills that people have to invest in. And then at the same time, the people that have been in the organization for many years, that have that institutional knowledge, but maybe are still used to doing things the old way and using Access databases and those spreadsheets, we will have to bring them along and educate them around technology, how to use it, and specifically give them the idea that this is a tool that they can use. Because I said earlier, in the 90s, we had the same kind of thing with computers, and people thought, well, computers going to take my job. I will say nowadays, we all use computers. And I would even say more, if I take your computer away, how would you be able to do your job today? So it's a different way of thinking about how to use technology, but there's a lot of training that comes with that, a lot of empowerment, a lot of upskilling, because the biggest challenge, it's not a technology challenge, it's a leadership challenge, because we have that pushback, we have that resistance to change. And so people will not want to change. That's one thing that we're not good at. Yes, we evolve, but people evolve very, very slowly. So the real one thing that stands in our way to progressing over the next few years is ourselves. It's the human side, and that's why that needs a lot more attention and focus.
I love that. I'm going to transition. I baited our audience with this hook. about an opportunity to create efficiency and value. And this, I'm going to read this to you. This is an article from Supply Chain Management Review. It talks about without the right yard operating system, even the best tech delivers marginal returns. What's missing is a unified model for enterprise yard operations, one that provides network-wide visibility, standardizes performance, and drives continuous improvement across all sites. So I like this comment, and you're a very strong thought leader in this specific space. I'm really interested in your perspectives on this. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve specific to yard management, and what does it mean? Like, what is the opportunity available if folks can solve this problem?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said in the beginning, Spencer, of the world has changed a lot, and yet we still have the same operational efficiencies we had in the 90s. The yard is a perfect example of that. I started working in yards, trailer yards, asset-based yards back in the 90s when I was a logistics operator, ran trucks, and I saw the inefficiency. And to be honest, I saw that again in, the 2010s when I was at PepsiCo, where we had invested in a lot of different technologies and a lot of different processes, but yet the yard was still a weak point. Then I went to Gartner's, started talking to companies about yard, still said, wow, this yard, it's still a black hole in the supply chain. Now what's happened over the last 3.5 decades is we've invested massively in warehouse automation. So what that means is we've increased the velocity in the warehouse. We've increased up to a certain point velocity in transportation by using transportation management systems, visibility, all the way up to the gate. But then what happens? That truck comes at the gate, it has to go to the dock door, it has to pass through the yard, and in the yard we haven't done anything. So that bottleneck that was already a bottleneck now only becomes a bigger bottleneck because both sides have accelerated, but yet the thing it's in the middle that connects to both has not really gotten any attention. And a lot of people, I hear them say, yeah, Bart, but yards, it's just a smaller percentage of our cost. Well, look at your car, Spencer. I don't know what car you drive, but you could drive a $100,000 car and break down, and then you realize it was that $2 fuse that burned out, and it's a $2 fuse that kept you from going anywhere. So it's not necessarily pure the cost aspect of it, but now how does it drive your overall operations on the site? And also, how does it impact your carriers? Because they don't want to show up in busy times when your yard is inefficient. And it impacts your customer because bad yards lead to bad OTIF. Your products are going to be late. Why? Because they left your site late. And that is something with yard that I continue to stress, is that people cannot overlook the yard. Even at Gartner, Spencer, we had these hierarchy of supply chain metrics and hierarchy of logistics metrics. But where are the yard metrics? You can ask pretty much any person in supply chain. They'll have perfect warehouse KPIs, transportation KPIs. Where are your yard KPIs? It's hard to monitor. Why? Because people just don't focus on it. But trust me, it has become a huge bottleneck.
So for folks that are like, you know what, they're watching this and they're like, you know what, we don't put a lot of attention there. Like, what is one action they can take to begin to resource that area of opportunity?
A lot of people who tried to solve it, they just, again, went to the technology part, right? So let's put a YMS in and that'll help. Well, the problem with that was they only do it for the really large yards that have hundreds of parking spots, but they don't do it from an enterprise perspective. The other part is they haven't really looked at overall the process, the metrics that you need to use. Look at the people aspect, the safety aspect of it, the sustainability aspect. So what you need to start doing is look at it a lot more holistically and really come up, just like you do for the warehouse and for transportation, with a clear vision and strategy, and make sure that what we call those yard operations, that they basically include all of those different parts. And then you even want to ask yourself, is running a yard, is that my core expertise? Again, in transportation and warehouse, we're saying if it isn't, let's give it to a 3PL. Yet we all still want to run our own yards, or if we do, maybe we use kind of a more traditional provider. So there again, what is that best operating model for our yard that will make it run as efficient as we're running inside the four walls or as we're running on the road, and kind of give our yard that kind of health check, that's a prime example to represent the rest of logistics as well.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of folks to be kind of humbled by that comment. It's very easy to throw technology at a problem and realizing that's not really getting to the root cause of the issue. And so really great wisdom in there. I wanna transition offline. We were talking about a few things before we got on camera here. One, we were talking about you being mistaken as Brad Pitt by Sarah Barnes Humphrey, and what's up? That I understand why, of course. And we were also talking about you being the head thinker of Better Supply Chain. So what are you doing with this group? I'm really fascinated about the thought leadership that's coming out. Just help us understand what's happening there.
Yeah, one of the things that, besides being mistaken for Brad Pitt, and again, it was just a name calling, right? She just called me Brad instead of Bart. I know Bart is not a very popular name, but I'm very happy that we now have this famous celebrity called Bart Simpson, because it opened up the whole world for me for instead of saying, what's your name in Asia and going Bart and people having no clue to Bart now being a world-renowned name. But around the head thinker and better supply chains, the good thing of having been around for a while is that people will listen to you, and hopefully you've amassed a little bit of experience over the years to say, one side of it is, how do I give back to the industry that gave me so much? And part of that is having these ideas and helping to educate the market and helping to educate younger people that are coming in the industry about what's going on in supply chains, helping the leaders maybe focus on new ways of thinking. And so I put a lot of time into thinking about supply chain and how we can help drive that forward, so that the supply chain that I started in the 90s, I feel like I contribute even a very small salt grain to it, to leaving it in a better place when I finally retire, which I hope will not be for a long time, because I still have a lot of ideas and I still feel like I have a lot to say and to contribute. But that's really what thought leadership is. How do you drive an industry forward? How do you help people? And how do you help educate that new role of, or that new cycle of people coming into the industry? And I would say from that perspective, I see it at all the different universities. There's a lot of the younger generation, a lot of people, probably our kids' age, that are choosing to pick supply chain, to go study that and go into supply chain workforce, because it's very attractive to younger people. I'm lucky enough to have a godson in Belgium who's 25-year-old. Shout out to Thibaut, who's now working in supply chain at Johnson & Johnson. So he kind of followed in the footsteps of his godfather. And it's really exciting to see that, because like I said, supply chain wasn't a specific choice for us when we went into college, and we kind of went into it. So I think we're in a good spot. But again, that thought leadership is needed to drive the industry forward.
I love that. Well, you definitely, at least from my vantage point, show no signs of stopping based on your speaking circuit that you're a part of. Recently Latin America, talking about supply chain issues around there. What do you notice about the differences and the issues that we talk about in the States versus when you go to other continents and talk about other, what's different continent to continent, country to country about the problems we're trying to solve?
They're different and the same. They're the same in matters that a lot of our impacts in supply chain, our disruptions, are global, right? It's not like something happens in the Panama Canal or happens in the Middle East that it only affects one region. It affects all of us. But what's different is the culture, and as well as the rate of maturity of the different locations. And so when I was just recently at the Logistics World Summit and Expo in Mexico City and spoke there, I thought about it and said, when I go out there and I talk about the now philosophy and I talk about the new technology methodology, I have to be very aware that a lot of Latin American countries, the digital maturity is way lower than in North America. And especially in areas, Spencer, like logistics, North America is still the number one market. We use more technology in supply chain logistics than anywhere else in the world, even more than in Western Europe. So you have to be sensitive to that. And so I thought, how do I really focus my message to those companies that are from all the different Latin American countries and even from the Caribbean? And when I thought about it, it's like, well, it can be a huge challenge because you haven't had to use a lot of technology, because your motivating factor of high cost of labor or talent wasn't there. I mean, people up to recently were able to hire 3 people for the cost of 1 person in the US because of that lower labor cost, similar to what Eastern Europe has over Western Europe. But again, they're having the same issues with aging workforce. They have the same expectation from customers who don't want people to call them or fax them paper, but want to do that in an integrated way using technology. And so there's an opportunity for them. And so my main message was, I know it will take you a little bit longer. I know you may be coming with a little bit of a backstep and a little bit of a, maybe a little bit further behind, but you have a way bigger opportunity because you haven't done the investment. I work for companies like PepsiCo, where we invested heavily in warehouse and transportation, all the different technologies. It's a lot harder for those companies to come up with new ways to create productivity. If you have barely used technology, look at that huge opportunity you have ahead of you. But again, Spencer, I will say the only one thing that stands in your way is us as people. It's the change management aspect. So we have to start now and then create that journey, kind of define what that path will look like and say, you know, we don't have to rush it. We don't have to go from digital maturity level 1 to 5 overnight, but what are the right steps to take and what are the right ways to do that? And by the way, technology nowadays is a lot easier to consume and to absorb than it used to be 30 years ago. So with that democratization of technology, the fact that it's a lot cheaper and easier to use for users, it gives you an incredible leeway, and it would almost be almost illegal to not, use more technology in your organization.
No, that's a good word right there. So I want to talk about, let's whine about supply chain. Let's talk about that. Now, this is the fusion of 2 great passions of yours, one being supply chain, of course, and the other being wine. So let's talk about the wine. Where did the passion for wine come from?
It came from my dad. So my dad was a wine amateur, and growing up in Europe, growing up in the 70s, and growing up in Europe also means you start drinking from an early age. We used to drink table beer from the age of 10. I will say that was non-alcoholic beer. But then we started drinking wine from the age of 12. And by the way, we didn't get sodas. It was water or wine for dinner. And so looking at that world, I found it a very fascinating world. It's typically beautiful areas. You have all the vineyards. I kind of had the same love for wine that my dad had, not just drinking it, but also experiencing it, going to the vineyards with my dad, doing the tastings, and of course, kind of knowing what's behind it, right? Because it is an art. Although a lot of science and technology is being used, I think it's still the essentials of the winemaker that makes a great wine, and it's the people, not the pure technology, that makes the great wine. And so when I was thinking about all the webinars we're doing, and there's loads of them, one thing I found is that a lot of webinars kind of follow the same paradigm, and it's a lot more about topics and products and technologies rather than the people. And I said, how do I do a show where I can be passionate about something, because we all share passions. And I find it when I talk to people and they see the guitars in the background, and it's something you immediately have in common. Same with, for example, wine, but also a format where I can put the people first. And so the way the show works, every show, I start with decanting the bottle of wine. And then we also start with decanting our guests, who is a supply chain leader. We decant their career to kind of make the people understand, the audience, how did they get into that role? How did they get into supply chain? And really focus around the people. Now, we talk a lot about other topics as well, the headwinds and tailwinds in supply chain, and very specific topics. Last week's was about procurement. The next one is going to be about supply chain planning. But again, I want to stress it is about people, because it's truly my belief that the agility we get in supply chain is driven by people, and it's people empowered by technology. And you shouldn't look at it of people versus technology. And that's why I want to highlight the personal, the people aspect, things like passions, like wine, and put the people first in the webinar.
I love that. 2 more questions. One a wild card. We'll come to that here in a second. Where our worlds intersect is on the M&A side of things. And so you have right now one of the most innovative periods in a lifetime, quite frankly, in terms of what's going on right now. a lot of disruption, and those are conditions that are typically pretty ripe for M&A. What advice would you give to folks? Because where I think we overlap in philosophy, one thing that we always tell folks, no matter if they see themselves as buyers or builders through acquisition, is that through periods of disruption, it's really critical to stay educated and to stay agile. So as it relates to M&A, like what advice would you give for folks as they're kind of navigating solving problems? What advice would you give for folks that want to participate in the M&A activity and how to best position themselves to capitalize on it?
There's obviously a lot of different sides to the M&A, depending on where you are. Are you a tech vendor? Are you a services vendor? But I'm starting to see a lot more activity around merger and acquisitions, as well as investments. We know the last few years, the economic situation wasn't that good. We didn't have a lot of exits, for example, in the technology space, which has held up a lot of venture capital and PE money. But we're starting to see a lot of that come back. And so last year we saw some of the first examples of M&A activity happening. And I think there's a lot more that's going to go forward, whether it's pure acquisitions or it's mergers or it's companies acquiring other companies to grow themselves bigger. I think there is, because of all the disruptions, there's also kind of a thinking of if we get bigger and we get more economies of scale, or we can provide broader platforms, we can be more global, that maybe in some senses reduces risk. We have more opportunity to be more competitive. That powered by the fact that companies will continue to invest in supply chain, because everyone now understands that supply chain is so important. Again, you got to remember, not that long ago, we still had to explain when we said we're in supply chain. People said, what is that? What's supply chain? I don't think we have to do that anymore. People understand what supply chain is, and they understand supply chain is one, if not the most important part of a whole organization, because you can make the best product, have the best price. But if you can't get it there and basically make that promise true for the customer by delivering it on time, then you don't really have a product. And so I think there's so much opportunity for companies. And that's why also we see a lot of new startups coming into space. And yes, a lot of AI startups, but it's not just AI startups. Again, because of that democratization of technology, someone can come in and say, hey, we use Claude. We can program and code an application very, very quickly. And so we're going to see more and more technology startups coming into the market. Now, that doesn't mean that not just as many will fail. And technology, Spencer, has changed. It used to be all about capabilities. Back in the 90s, a software was a product you bought off the shelf when we still had CD-ROMs or even before floppy disks. And it was all about product capabilities. It didn't have data. It didn't have networks. Now it's almost flipped on its side, where it's all about the data it has and contextualized data. It's the network you have, especially in areas like logistics, where you need to be tied to your suppliers and your carriers and your customers. But now it's also more about not just having capabilities, but having the capacity to deliver value to your customers very, very quickly. I don't think people are willing to invest in a lot of different areas in software that takes them 3 years, millions of dollars, and a lot of their resources to implement.
That's a good word right there. All right, final question, sir. A little bit of a wild card. You tease those beautiful instruments behind you. So my question is this: I'm a music enthusiast, songwriter in another lifetime. I'm curious, if you had to put a song title, maybe one of your favorites, to kind of capture the theme of what you think 2026 is going to be about, what would be that song that would best characterize what to expect in 2026?
I'm glad you asked the question, and I have the answer because I thought about it myself way before we even planned this. But it would be a song by Van Halen, and the song is called Right Now, which obviously, as you can imagine, goes right with my now philosophy. Obviously, back then, the history was a little bit different because the world was in a different ways. But I actually rewrote the lyrics. I don't have them right in front of me. I actually had a little bit of help from Google Gemini to say what in the now philosophy and what in today's world would be the lyrics to this song Right Now by Van Halen. And so I did that. But again, it's that call to action, and it's be aware of your surroundings and don't see now as something that where everything has to change now. But again, you have to start. I always say the hardest part of running a marathon is not, like some people think, the last mile getting to the finish line. It's actually the first step to get to the starting line. Because if you don't start, you cannot finish. And so we need to understand that we have to start changing the way we think. It starts with the mindset, start with leadership and our vision. And I think if we do that, then we are going to get there. Maybe not right now, but soon enough.
Well, I hope soon enough we get those lyrics and put them in the comment section of this video when we release it, because I got to know. Hey, listen, Bart, I really appreciate you generously sharing your wisdom with our network. That's going to do it for us here in the hot seat. We will see you next time.